questions. So I apologize to those of you who were at the MNLP because 2/3 of this was my MNLP talk. The middle third is not. That's because it's kind of hard to generate talks on the fly. So what I'm going to talk about is work has to do with basically connecting words, text to other forms of knowledge, trying to interpret it in a variety of ways. This is work involving many people at Google, both in Mountain View in New York. But I want to call out specifically a few who kind of did some of the experiments and some particular data sets that I'm showing here. Rahul Gupta and Neil Lau, who work on sort of information extraction, in particular relation extraction work. Marta Sens, who works on coreference. And Amar Subramania, who was sort of my kind of essentially second in command in all things to do with language understanding in Mountain View. There's also some of the work that I'll talk about in the middle was work we did with William Cohen at CMU. So I'm going to start with an example, and again, sorry those of you who are at MNLP, but I'll kind of maybe try to say some different things about it. So it turns out that I'm like a fanatic modern jazz listener, and Dave Holland is one of my favorite musicians ever. So if you type that query, Dave Holland albums, to Google today, you get a kind of interesting experience, right? Rather than getting just these links here, which are very useful links, like his own page, Amazon, where you can buy stuff, and this Wikipedia page, you also get two other things. You get this carousel at the top, which is a sort of a pictorial representation of some of these albums. By the way, one of the his earliest recordings is the one on the left there. It's 40 years old, sorry. Conference of the Birds, and if you've never listened to Conference of the Birds, you have to. And everything else there is very good, but that one is like one for the ages. And also this thing called a knowledge panel at that end, which is a bunch of information. It includes a little bit of an extract from the Wikipedia page in this case, and a bunch of attributes like birth date and groups that he's been involved in, and some movies that he's been in, and so on. And that information comes from essentially an extension of Freebase. So Freebase, for those of you who don't know, was created by a company called MetaWeb initially, but it's an open and publicly editable knowledge base of essentially triple representation, RDF representation. And the company was acquired by Google around 3 years ago, and they have been working within Google to develop this type of explicit representation of factual knowledge, which has the benefit over search results that it can be curated, and therefore it can be highly accurate, but of course requires work to maintain that accuracy. So this is a great experience. So I want to know something more specific, not any album, but the ones with Eric Harland. And I'm unhappy in the sense that I don't get that great experience. In the ideal world, I would get just like, just the same carousel, but just the albums with Eric Harland, which there are 3 of them, I think. And maybe 4. So I can't remember exactly. So what you get instead is the usual search results. Now, so we have this contrast, right, where on one hand you have this knowledge structure that you can interpret certain queries against, but in some cases we fail to do that. And it could be for a variety of reasons. It could be that there's a more complex query and that we don't quite know how to interpret it, and there's some truth to that. because people can say these kinds of things in many different ways. They might not say it grammatically. In a nice grammatical noun phrase, they could say something like Dave Holland, Eric Harlan albums. In fact, it's typically what they would say, right? Or even Holland, Harlan albums, something like that. Anyway, but there are some such results, and in fact, the mentions of an album just issued in September with a, maybe accidentally unfortunate name, which I like this meaning of the word a lot, though, because it's a great album. It's also the name of the band that they're playing. They've been touring the world, and if they come to the neighborhood, you should go and listen. And there's also this search result there, which actually turns out, if you go to it, it's a nice piece of text from Dave Holland's own website. And this text has a lot of information you want. So we couldn't quite answer the question, but this first search result has the answer, actually, turns out. Or a answer. Prism is an album released in that date, October 3rd, I guess. I thought it was in September, but never mind. Yeah, sorry?
September 3rd.
September 3rd. I can't read the dates anymore. And you can read the stuff and say, yeah, this is an album that involves Dave Holland and Eric Harlan and a couple of two other musicians. And so you can actually do something more. You can say, well, I have that text, and I can run it through some analysis machinery, and this is actual output from a system that we have at Google. And what you see there is a bunch of so the text has been. So I took just some of the text from that and pasted in the little box, and then it parsed it, analyzed it for me, and I see things like in red you have actual names. By the way, interrupt, harass me, whatever, at any point. Are people names. So it turns out that this version of the system does some variety of things, including some name entity classification into the infamous perl.org, etc. And Dave Holland, it recognizes in red the things that he thinks are people, in blue things that like organization-like, and in brown things he doesn't quite know what they are, but they are none of the above. And so you see that I did not terrible analysis of that. But also it is able to recognize that this Dave Holland, mentioned as Dave. Oh, it did co-reference, right? So it's Dave Holland, Dave, and he are all mentions of that particular person, Dave Holland, who's actually in the if you see there the Freebase MID as that's the ID, the key, unique key for that entity, that guy, Dave Holland, born in Wolverhampton in whenever, in Freebase. And we also can see that equally for Eric Harland that and that's again correct a co-reference to that. So we did a bunch of we did document co-reference. We did link, entity linking to the appropriate knowledge graph. And so we are on our way to say, well, we can sort of read that text a little bit. We could maybe extract some stuff out of it. So what we really want is to know this, right? That there's album Prism, and that album has as artists. Artist is a particular. So musical recordings have a particular kind of type in Freebase, and one of the attributes of the type is artist. Is an artist that played in that recording. There's some kind of weird things about it that I won't go into, but generally, what I would like to know is if I had that query, I should be able to somehow connect, say, albums with Eric Harland. I should say, well, these guys are artists in that album, so that is a good answer to my query. And notice, by the way, that, and I won't go into a lot of detail that today, but there's a sort of an interesting question of, how can I take a query like the one before and analyze it so that I could hypothesize that meant one possible meaning for that query was I want an album where, so that's a musical recording. I need to know that synonym, album is a sort of synonym of that, at least in this context. And that with might mean, in this case, another artist that participates with in that recording. So how do I map from that natural language query to that path in the knowledge graph? So that goes from Dave Holland back, by artist -1, as it were, and then by artist to Eric Harland. So that the learning, there's a whole set of interesting problems there. How do I learn how to map a query like that to a particular type of path in a graph like this? And of course, there will be ambiguities of various kinds, which you can easily imagine. There's been a bunch of work recently in this area, work by people like Luc Zettelmoyer's group and Percy Liang's group and Alexander Yates, of course Ray Mooney. There's been but the specific case where, the people who have been doing this against Freebase in particular recently, there's a really nice, two nice papers at the MNLP, one led by Jonathan Brandt, and the other one by Tom Kwiatkowski, both on doing interpretation of queries of that kind against Freebase directly, learning how to do that. So now the reality, so that's what I would like to do, but there are a few kind of things getting in the way, and this gets to the practicalities as matter. So you read these papers, these beautiful papers that you, at the MLP, you really like them, and then you start thinking about the reality of these problems, and they get a little bit more challenging for reasons that sometimes are not obvious when if you're not trying to do this for a living, as it were. So there are good news here. So, for instance, there's this thing in blue there, Fender Rhodes, and they will actually get it right? It's it's this company that builds these particular kinds of electronic pianos. That's pretty good. And by the way, Craig Taborn is amazing. These guys are all amazing. But Craig Taborn, the guy who plays the piano and Fender Rhodes, is just out of this world. Yeah.
So to be clear, Fender Rhodes being conjoined with piano.
Sorry? With the
Fender Rhodes here being conjoined with piano.
No, yeah. No, I know. But the point is, what I'm saying is, some entities we get right, but we will see some things that we get wrong, or at least don't get. And then there's Prism. It's marked there, but we can actually, it turns out we cannot disambiguate it. And the reason is, because you'll see a reason for that in a minute. So, Prism is a very generic term. There are many things in the world called prism, generic concept of a prism, but there are multiple musical bands and recordings called prism, as it turns out. The prism in other contexts. There's, prism is there are probably 17 companies called Prism, or at least with aliases like that. So if you go to Freebase and look for the prism, the recording, it exists. But it has pretty much no information at all. So I don't know who put it there, but whatever they did a really terrible job. So for instance, it says that the only artist in it is Dave Holland, and nothing else. It doesn't say anything about genre. It has a release date, is an album, but there's very little information to go on. So if I am an entity linking system that is looking at a record like that and say, is this what is meant in this context? I have terribly little amount of, the information I have to go on is very, very little. You might argue that there's just enough for us to link it, But our entity linking system, which you can see in action in public, and I'll tell you how in a minute, is a little bit more conservative. It errs on the side of precision rather than recall. So, by the way, a few weeks ago, we released a very large, the annotation of the whole of ClueWeb 9. For those of you who've heard of ClueWeb 9, is a very large web IR data set that is curated at CMU. And we will release the entity linking annotation of ClueWeb 9, where we use our in-house entity linker, set an even higher precision threshold to mark as much as we could as of the entity mentions there, and link them to Freebase. It's kind of like it's a very large data set. It's noisy, of course. We made mistakes, but I think there was an interesting paper that Sumin Chakrabarti did this study where he has an entity linking system that does some kind of really clever joint inference, and he recently compared its results on some of ClueWeb text, and what he found is basically that the mistakes, the disagreements, ours is way. It's basically set at the much higher. We could have set our threshold much lower and still have precision comparable to his and increase recall a lot. So our point in the precision recall curve is pretty high, which is nice to hear. Anyway, but the point is, in this situation, we are not sufficiently confident to decide that this is what's referred to. And this is kind of a very important problem in this whole area of linking, queries to text into knowledge bases, which is that often the information in the knowledge base is way behind. Yes, sure.
So you said that you failed to link the two. If you could bring up that next panel. Yeah. So one of the contradictions I noticed is that on the Dave Holland webpage, the release date is 9/3.
Yes.
It says 9/2. Would details like that contribute to the lack of confidence? Or?
Well, it wouldn't help, but that would be not maybe one of the most significant features. I think basically we don't know anything about this thing. You only know, we know this connection with Dave Holland. Maybe that would have been enough, but certainly it wasn't. It turns out it wasn't enough.
You also know it's an album.
Yeah, but there are other albums called Prism. By the rock band from Seattle, right? The point is not that our system is perfect. That these are problems you have to face when you're trying to do this kind of an interpretation, which is that I tried this example because I wanted to see how well we can do these things, and found that we went some way, but we couldn't go all the way because there's missing information. And the point I want to make is that however good your knowledge base is, it's always going to lag the world. And however much resources the community and companies put into in curating these knowledge bases, they're always going to be, so think about people, for instance, one example is people die all the time, unfortunately. And what happens is that for very famous people, the Freebase and the Wikipedia are updated like instantly. For people that are like not so famous but they still have a record, it might take 3 weeks. Sorry? Yeah, well, it's a long tail, right? So the kind of this sort of nice, cozy hypothesis, right, that you can. If you have the knowledge in a knowledge base like this, you can use it to answer queries, search queries very accurately. It can happen, but there are many failure modes, and many of them have to do with a point where you really have to say, well, if I want my knowledge base or my question answering to be more thorough, I have to go to the text. And that's the sort of the thing that I'm going to speak about next. So, so this is like my slogan for today on this front. So, what do I mean by the main title of this talk is, so what we are trying to do is to learn to translate and link between text by knowledge bases and semi-structured data. So try to create a set of tools and components that can connect these things together effectively. And but we have to accept a lack of semantic detail. That's why we call it low-pass semantics. All this higher frequency is gone, because we just, in part because many times there are sort of subtleties in sense of terms and in the contextually dependent word senses and inferences you can draw that are just not available to us, not at this point. But in the third part of the talk, I will get around to say, well, some of those are actually more available than people think. And so the idea is when we have these links, we can do certain inferences, for instance, the inference needed to answer that query, and which are like proxies or sort of hints of meaning. I mean, they are not the full meaning of the text. They are not by any means, they don't achieve the kind of level of understanding that, even relatively young kids achieve, but it's useful enough in a number of situations. So let me just, before I go on, give you a kind of a little vignette of the kinds of things that we do day to day. We do this at work, but it's other groups in other companies or in academia do similar things. I mean, not necessarily do exactly the same accuracy or the same efficiency, but so if I have a little bit of text there about someone. And we can, everybody knows that we can parse this kind of stuff pretty well with dependency parsers that can be very fast. Make mistakes. In this case, they didn't make that many mistakes, or any. And we can, given that analysis, then we can identify things like, the noun phrases, proper noun phrases, pronouns, try to hypothesize co-reference relations, like here, his, Wesner, and so on, and identify also things that look like locations, and then, catalog what, the main things talked about in this passage. Wesner, and we think he's masculine, because we know that Eric tends to be a male name, and so on and so forth. So if you can combine many pieces of information, many of you know this, to achieve a fairly useful level of analysis, which doesn't mean that we don't make mistakes. We make lots of mistakes. For example, if this said Eric Wesner, we'll talk about this tomorrow, the Wesner parents were from Poland, and it said something like, and people, it was believed that he was born and raised in Uvalde, in North Carolina. In fact, he was born in Kenya. And so if that's said, that we would still think probably our extraction mechanism will not realize that, or maybe not, because most of the techniques for extraction we're using today are not sensitive to context in the right way, to proposition, in particular indicators of factivity. Is this a factual statement or not? Things we need to work on. Doesn't mean. So one more point on this is the type of extraction that a lot of teams are doing today is basically look at patterns, either surface patterns like this one, or parse patterns like that one, that link phrases in the text and in various learning mechanisms, one of which I'll describe in a moment, to infer which of these paths in the types of paths in the parse tree, say, are indicative of certain relations in say, the knowledge base. So in this case, the relation I'm interested in is a relation for birthplace, or place of birth, sir. And those are two patterns that are indicative of that. So it would allow us to know where this guy was born. So one point I want to make, and this is a point that I would not make except that there have been papers published, and that poorly reviewed papers published, I would say, that claim that this doesn't matter. And so I'm going to give some data to show otherwise. So it has been argued that to do this kind of extraction, this pattern-based extraction, text patterns are enough, essentially regular expressions on steroids. Maybe with some parts of speech tagging, but that's all. So we did an experiment. We had a bunch of relations that we were interested in. And we were trying to find on a large collection of text matches for those patterns, and then do essentially a pattern induction algorithm, which of the kind that I will describe later, although it's a simple one, and which says and try to see how much we can extract. So we have a very large collection of text, and we have a bunch of examples. That then lead to 580,000 matches, instances, from which you can abstract 187 text patterns. Those correspond to 24 relations, and these two numbers here are, the first number is how many of the things that we actually extract on new text using those patterns we knew already in the knowledge base, and here's how many we extracted that we, by doing this sampling, we believe are at above a reasonable level, a threshold of accuracy. If I remember correctly, 90%. So those are the numbers for that condition. Then I apply a parser, and I call it slow, although it's fast by other standards, but it's slow by the standards that matter to us. Slav Petrov, some of you know, says you should change a slide, and I forgot, to accurate parser. It's actually not slow. He points out correctly. And just by parsing, we can get, and using parse patterns, we can get way more patterns, way more relations, lots more known triples, and also lots more likely triples. So we are, for various reasons, we haven't yet finished writing up this thing for publication, mainly because we've been busy with other stuff. But this is pretty nice, I think. But this following is even nicer. We have a coreference system, within document coreference system, which is kind of comparable to the state of the art in the literature, say like one of the Stanford Sieve system, I say. And see what happens when we apply coreference. Everything goes up a lot. And is the number of extracted triples, the number of relations, everything. Is this surprising? Not at all. I mean, very often you have, he was born and raised in Raleigh, South Carolina. Who is he? Now, a system that, an extraction system that doesn't do coreference is not going to know who he is, and it's going to fail that fact. And we've seen this. I mean, actually, so kind of a pro tip here. If you're doing extraction, do coreference. We use this for real, not only our team, but other teams at Google. Having a decent coreference system on the text makes a huge difference in the quantity and quality of extractions you can do.
Let me ask you a detailed question.
Yeah.
When you say you've discovered from 24 to 32 8 more types of relations.
Yeah.
So is the relation just some kind of predicate, or is there some normalization that's involved?
Well, so these are relations where we know the relation in advance, right? So I know, and we start with, we bootstrap. It's a bootstrap like a snowball type system, right? Although we don't iterate. You just take a bunch of known pairs for the relation, match them against the sentence in the text, and then find the patterns that are common. And the point is, of the relations we started with, which was, I think, 40, many of them we couldn't get any yield. Yeah.
So you don't have to label the relations.
Yes. Yeah. They're known relations. Yeah. We're not doing clustering.
Yeah. One more thing. When you go from just parsing to the coref, does the pattern then become more complex? Like
no, the patterns are the same. No, the patterns, in this case, the patterns are the same. It's just the correct has been resolved. The reference was resolved. We know that he is Eric Wisner in that case. Now, correct makes mistakes. But remember, this is aggregation, so some of those mistakes get cleaned up. Yes?
A quick question. So when people develop parsers, they have their own metrics like escort. Does progress on an escort equate to progress on this?
You'll see. Next column. So this is like a labeled F score for these parsers, which are dependency parsers. It's not very high, but remember, this is not Wall Street Journal text. And you see the difference there. The fast parser is, I think, 15 times faster than the slow parser. So it's less accurate, substantially less accurate. You see at the bottom row. And yet, the quality of the extraction is not much worse. Now, I'll give you a caveat. If you were doing these extractions from Wikipedia, the quality will go down a lot more. So it turns out that Wikipedia is written in especially hard to parse English. You know, it's right, it's true. So in fact, whenever we do any kind of work on Wikipedia, we parse it with the guy in the middle, the slow parser, not with the fast parser. Sorry? I don't know. Oh, I've not tried it actually, or maybe it has been tried, but I don't know of any. But normal. So here's the reason. Like, one of the reasons is you take the opening sentence of any biography page in Wikipedia. So-and-so, and then open paren, a long parenthetical, born on Germany, whenever, 18 whatever, died, Princeton, New Jersey, 1950, no, this is Einstein, right? I don't remember the exact dates. You know, big parentheses. And then a long sequence of positives, scientist, you know, whatever, and so you have very complex positive parenthetical constructions that are things that are totally against the Wall Street Journal style. So, I mean, much that I love the Penn Tree Bank, I must say that it's just it's caused a lot of problems downstream that we're trying to fix by getting a lot more data annotated. But that's, you know, that's okay. You have to start somewhere. Sorry? What? No, I don't. I love it. I mean, we couldn't have started without it. But, you know, actually the lesson is a different one. Right? The lesson is the paper, so whenever you move from what you see in the papers, the research papers, not what we see in the Wall Street Journal, that's a different problem, and to actually using these things for real purposes, you have to be prepared to, you know, big surprises. And I don't think people realize how big the surprises are and how much work you might need to do to deal with those surprises. So one thing, so anyway, so that was like the setting about, so we need to read, given that the knowledge bases are always incomplete, we need to read them. And we like to learn how to read them. So one of the things I did talk of some work which is a little, you know, is a couple of years old. The published version is a couple of years old. We'll continue to work on this. We have a lot more going on right now, which we hope to submit to publication within the next 6 months. But so it's this idea of doing joint inference of some kind between freebase or the knowledge base and some text, where we parse the text, we linked to entity resolution or entity linking, we link the records for entities in the knowledge base to the text, and then we try to essentially find paths in this joint graph or path types that are indicative of certain relations that we're interested in populating a knowledge base with. So for the purpose of this discussion, the path type is these chains of labeled arcs in the graph. So so it might be here a mention. This entity has been mentioned, and then I might go this way, a subject, and then I might go somewhere, I might go somewhere else, and so on. So I'm going to traverse these edges and record what the labels are on the edges. I might traverse an edge backwards as well, so that I could have, for instance, mention -1 going that way. So we're going to look at random walks on such a graph, because these graphs are big, so we're not going to explore them fully. And what we're going to do is to learn weights on the types of paths, that is, the sequences of labels, that favor walks that connect the sources we care about to the destinations we care about for a particular relation. So kind of basically we start with something like we have some directed edge label graph. We have some source, some target, and so we want to we hypothesizing some labeled new edge R, and we want to know where that sources are connected to target by starting with some examples and saying, oh, if I went through, say, RK and RN, maybe that's an R as well. It's that pair is one that I was given as a training example. I say, well, okay, that's an instance of, say, for instance, profession. So maybe the source is Miles Davis and the target is musician. And the relation R is profession. So William and Milau and William Cohen did this work a number of years ago. It was part of Mi's dissertation. And we've been exploring this idea both before he came to Google, when he was an intern, since then. So we have these path types, and what we're going to do is to score them basically by a logistic regression type model. So where you have two components. One is what's the probability according to the random walk of going from S to T, where the label sequence is that label sequence, intended label sequence pi, and then there's a parameter theta, which is just a weight on that, and we're just going to train these things from. We'll do some feature selection as well that I won't go into, and train these by regularized logistic regression. So the idea is I want to favor, this is basically learning a very simple kind of logic program. This says, I find R if I went through R1, R2, Rn. It's a kind of essentially a bunch of binary, a very particular kind of form clause. So, okay. Yeah.
So in essence here, the endpoints?
Yes. Yeah.
So you can have features that look at the entire path. So you normalize your...
No, we don't. The features here are just this label sequence. Actually, nowadays we do something a bit more than that, but that's not yet. Is not in these results.
I'm just trying to figure out in that proportionality, what do you normalize by? So what sums to one? Is it all the paths from S to every possible point that it can get to?
You mean? Let's see if I can say what you were asking me.
The next one.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, this one.
No, this is not. I'm just taking that probability. So is the probability? Oh, yes, I see what you mean. So is the probability that I will reach T from S, given starting at S, what's the probability I will get to T by a path labeled pi, where's my intended path? So it's conditional. So adds over all the places I could get to, right? So those probabilities typically are very low. Those numbers are typically very low. Those P's.
So the path is not decomposed across R, and this is
No.
conditioned on S.
No, the whole path is the feature here.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, basically, you very rapidly become too sparse. So you restrict the path to be length 3 or 4. Also, it's computationally. So let me just move on. So one case study we did a while ago is we had a version of FreeBase. Back then, FreeBase was half of what it is today. So this has been growing very fast, but. And we are studying three relations: profession, nationality, and parent. So 2 million people in freebase back then, of which only 0.3 had back then a recorded profession. And most of the people we knew there were either politicians or actors, because those are the famous people, right? And then you have to do some careful, for training these models, you have to do some careful sampling. So in particular, you have to be for a relation where, that has a frequent, so for instance, profession, there are many people who are actors, and for instance, and so you want to sample with respect to the number of actors, basically proportional to the 1 over the square root of that. So you shrink the number of, proportionally the number of cases of actors in your training data. And then for negative examples, you sample pairs of concepts that are compatible with the relation in terms of types. And so we do the sort of the standard text processing that we discussed before. The corrective resolution algorithm we were using back then was sort of in the style of pretty much comparable to the deterministic Hagege-Klein algorithm. It's doing something slightly different now, more like the sieve algorithm, and do this linking. But the one thing we do not use for these experiments our current entity linking algorithm. We use a very simple thing that for each phrase we just took the most probable entity for that phrase, for a named entity. And the reason we did that is because since it was for publication, we didn't want to have this hidden piece that people could not replicate. And so we can do the linking that we talked about. So, and then we just had to take the relations we are interested in, and we find all the web pages that have the appropriate concepts in the relations we are interested in, which is in this case 60 million web pages, which are dominated by frequent concepts, as you might imagine. Like Barack Obama occurs a lot in those web pages. So we again sample the sentences. So we just generate a graph of this form, which is very large. It's 2 billion nodes, 5 billion edges. And you applied an algorithm along those lines, which required to do some parallel processing by breaking the data. So basically the kinds of queries. A query here is a particular pair of entities that we know are truly in the set and in the relation. And so we explore in parallel all the places where they match in the text using an inverted index, and then aggregate the results of the patterns that of the path types that are that appear with the good weights. So here's the kind of example, a path that's actually learned for profession, which is if I am mentioned in a coordinated structure with someone else, Miles Davis and John Coltrane, and that person is, say, a musician, then I may be also a musician. This is not certain, but this is the kind of the feasible rules you learn. A and B are, when they appear in say news texts, often A and B do the same thing. Typically they are both players in a major league or something like that. So clearly, you look at an example like this, say that it's fallible, but these are the kinds of rules you can learn and give you a set of. So in fact, as you see the numbers, so what looking here is profession, nationality, and parents. If we just try to infer by generalizing, by taking other, so sometimes you can infer a relation just from the knowledge base. So if A and B are, two people are, say, members of the same team, then they are both probably, and if one of them is a football player, the other one is likely to be a football player. So that's just what you do with just a knowledge base for profession. And if two people live in the same city, then they may with some probability be more likely to have the same nationality. Of course, that's very feasible, but now if you only do extraction so you have only from the knowledge base, only from text, and then by combining the two. Basically, systematically, you get a substantial improvement in the score, which is a mean reciprocal rank, where where you look at the rank of the correct answer and in your list. Now, these numbers may look low, but here's what's interesting when we actually look at human eval and look at the precision of the top-ranked answers. The precision at 100 for profession is almost good enough for us to automatically put in something like the knowledge graph. Because we actually know that these things are not, the error rate in something like the, free base is in the high 90s for the very common relations. Nationality is even better. Parents is really bad because that's partly because parents, you have two parents, and one is male and female, and those things kind of, and the way the free base represents the parent relation is actually, mother is parent that is male, and that makes some complications in the inference. So parent doesn't work as well. And also you typically confuse parents with sisters and brothers and so on because the patterns are not specific enough. But the level of results that since then have become quite a bit better, but both us and another team at Google have been using these kind of techniques or related techniques pretty effectively. And the other thing which is kind of interesting is this coverage thing for profession. When we extract 100,000 these triples automatically. 79,000 are about 79,000 or almost 80,000 different people. So we're getting a lot of yield out of this, a lot of new people. And that's actually been a very useful thing for professions because profession is so rarely populated. So, third part of the talk. So we can do this kind of thing, not just us, but many other teams are doing this kind of work. And it has some reasonable quality, but it has its problems. So the most strong attack on the problem of these approaches is a screed, I will use that word advisedly, that was given by Hector Levesque, who's a knowledge representation expert at the University of Toronto, in a paper invited paper at ICHCAI this year. So discussing the kinds of things that I've been talking about so far, and many others like that, it says, he's looking for questions where cheap tricks like this, that is everything before in this talk, cannot work. Let's find questions that are Google-proof. Now, that's kind of fighting words. So when I read this, I said, I wonder if I could play with this for a little while. And then he goes on to say, later on the paper, okay, there's a right way to do this, right? Not this wrong way, these cheap tricks, but the right way is we have a knowledge base. Well, we have one too, but it's not as smart as yours. Use procedures that operate on this, the reasoning. And then when I answer questions, I do it by doing this reasoning on knowledge base. And I say, yeah, I like that, but I know that my knowledge bases often are kind of incomplete, and so I sometimes don't just want to be sticking to the knowledge base. So I say, yeah, that's okay, that's maybe useful, but not necessarily sufficient. Anyway, so what he goes on to say is, here are the Google-proof questions. These are these famous Winograd schemas. So you look at something like that, Joan makes sure that to thank Susan for all the help she had given. Who had given the help? Clearly, a computer can, cheap tricks cannot figure it out because you have to know something about help, and you thank people that give the help, not the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, deep reasoning. Really, this is out of the box, our correct system realizes that she, by whatever cheap tricks it uses, is actually Susan. So maybe that test is not as good as he wanted. So, but maybe we're lucky, right? We're definitely cheap, but maybe lucky. So now I'll kind of confess that we can sometimes are unlucky. So here's a passage. This is from an actual news story about Steve Jobs. And when he died, Steve Jobs, U.S. President Barack Obama, oh, whoops, what happened there? See that? That's bad. That's not what the writer meant. That's what he meant, or he or she meant. So we might say, this is proof, all right? This is proof that, cheap tricks don't work. Well, so, and he said, access to a large, one of the things he said is that access to a large corpus of English text data should not by itself be sufficient. So, if that's all you have, you're not going to be able to solve these types of problems. So I had a problem in this previous slide, and I say, I wonder. So I decided to count, since counting is the first refuge of scoundrels, and so I did is say, let me look at sentences which are the form when such something. So there's a dependent clause and there's a main clause, and I'm going to look at the cases where. And this is a really cool insight from Marta, that the subject of the dependent clause and the subject of the main clause are the same and both a pronoun. So he, she. Those cases are almost certainly coreferential. If you have the pronouns in that configuration, it's almost certainly that they are coreferential. In contrast, we're going to pick other sentences for the same adverb and the same verb in the same two verbs where the subject is a name, the subject of dependent is a name, and the subject of root is a name. Almost certainly they are not going to be the same name and they are not going to be coreferential. So that's the denominator. And I take the log because I like to make the axis, I have positive and negative in my axis. And so here's when x, so the case we talk about, those two examples, when x arrived, y something or other. So here's something or others. So for instance, when Alice arrived, Bob ran away. So here's that example. So typically, when someone arrives, they don't run away on that same sentence, on that same clause. On the other hand, when someone arrives, they found things like the broken window, right? So this is a very common. This is the average for the whole data set, right? So you see that just by counting, from a large corpus of text, I could infer that typically, if I have a verb like run as the main verb with a when clause with arrived, they probably flee, leave, so on. That's going to be someone else. Whereas in the other case, it's going to be at the other end the same person. Well, let's see the case that we talked about. When X died, blah blah. Well, so remember when he died, a U.S. President Barack Obama called him blah blah blah. Call. Way down on the negative side. So they are not going to go.
So when someone dies, they don't call.
Yeah, they don't call, they don't move, they don't inherit, right? Someone else inherits, right? But they leave because they don't leave the room, they leave stuff to other people, right? They also want things, they wanted things that might not have happened. They worked somewhere, they lived somewhere, and so on and so forth. So just one more example. What happens for call? So there's kind of a bias, and it's actually interesting to see what's on the right there. On the left here, so die is kind of pretty negative as we wanted, and so that's the case at hand in that particular case. And then on the right side is that all these things, what happened is when he discovered, he called, and then call is an ambiguous verb. It could be he called. When he discovered the fire, he called the fire brigade. This is not call someone something, but just to call someone like in call on the phone. And we're not capturing those ambiguities here. It is very simple counting. We're just putting up with them. Final one, which is I really like this, is when X something, they said. And what's the somethings with high probability are basically perception verbs. They learned something, they found something, they looked at something, they heard something, they see something. Just like, you almost could say from this, you almost could cluster perception verbs up, which is kind of pretty cool.
You have speech verbs at the left.
Sorry?
You have speech verbs at the left.
Yes, that's right.
X is doing something and Y is replying.
Yeah. This is a lot. This is just these experiments took us a couple of weeks, and then Rahul, who was doing a lot of the data grinding with the sort of using some of the information pattern information extraction machinery we have, went to India to get married, and so we stopped until he gets back. But this is like a pretty tasty data set. So just kind of finish, otherwise run out of time here. So some very high-level thoughts on this. So one thing when people talk about knowledge bases versus text, they kind of think that they are two different things. But so my view on all of this is that knowledge bases is just text with funny brackets. It's a machine-readable encyclopedia basically. And encyclopedia is a very useful piece containing lots of useful information. And clearly, when we are reading, we might have to go and look at the term and go and check it, go to a reference work, a dictionary encyclopedia, to figure out what the term is. So that's what our machines are trying to do, right? When you're doing this linking, you're just saying what is this? Even when you're doing word senses ambiguation, same thing. So we should think about linkage between knowledge sources in general as the primary operation. The fact that that knowledge source is written in, say, RDF and the other one is written in Wikipediaese, it's just an accident of history. The second one which is more addressing Hector, who I respect, is a really, really smart guy, is there's a lot of overeducated introspection in this field. The claim, for instance, with respect to those Winograd schemas, that you need to do deep reasoning. By the way, there's some really cool psycholinguistics on this by Andy Kaler and Hannah Rode, which on this sort of on the discourse coherence and the incoherence, which suggests that people do some of these things extremely quickly and automatically, which to me makes me doubt that they are doing some very deep reasoning. And in fact, doing this experiment was, even start thinking about this experiment, which was inspired by reading their work. And I want to, go deeper in that. And so the final one is this idea that once you can read a little bit, even imperfectly, by having a stack of, relatively well-functioning pieces of text analysis, you can start doing a little bit better. The fact that we could do that reading by parsing the text, we could do those counts, then help us to do better co-reference. And we see this all the time now. That once you can parse fast enough and well enough and can do the same for co-reference and other things, you can really start bootstrapping these systems and you can continue. I don't see a natural ceiling for this. There probably is one, but it's to me, is beyond the event horizon. It is. I can see a lot we can continue this kind of progression for a long while to come without, we'll need better methods and so on, but I think we are in a very good position to kind of do this virtuous cycle between machine reading at one level and then improving the quality of reading that you can do. And that's all. Thank you.
The first first bullet kind of makes my head hurt a little bit, because when we think of taking all this knowledge that's out in the world and trying to extract facts so that we can use them to either show to people or for some downstream application, I've always thought of it exactly the opposite way, which is whether you have a knowledge base here and a text here, you want to say that there's some commonality between them. The text, like a Wikipedia page, that's a knowledge base. It just doesn't have. You say with the brackets, I'm saying text is a knowledge base without the brackets, and we do all this NLP, and we want to go in and put all these brackets around so that we can convert all of this multilingual, informal form, all these different kind of text into something that can then be handed off to something downstream from it, abstract of all the linguistic artifacts. So to say everything is text, I think text is kind of a big mess, whereas the brackets sort of add structure to the text.
The reason I flip this is because working a lot with things like freebase and its extensions, I find the many ways in which they are still a big mess. And in particular, there's a lot of misunderstood or not understood ambiguity in something like freebase. And I can go on a long digression about the mess that the information about music and musicians in freebase is in albums and records.
Is it because the semantics aren't clear of the structure that's there?
Yeah, but and that's because in the end, the concepts that are used are natural language concepts. They are not. There's no platonic universe of a music album. What's a music album? Like you get into what's a musical recording. You can get into ontological discussions that will last through all night as to whether a recording is, the event that happened in a particular studio, a particular time, in wherever, or the bits that were extracted. But what bits? The original bits, or the ones that were downsampled for this? It just gets very quickly. See, what happened is when people started doing ontology, they were misled by people. In the following sense, people are easy to individuate because we are kind of unique. Each of us is different from every one of us. Even fraternal brothers are different in some ways because of epigenetics. We are all different, right? So it's easy to individuate us. But most of the other things we talk about are very hard to individuate. You talk about iPhone 5S. What is that? It's type or token? It's the one that someone has. What about the Model 2 or 3? What happens if, for instance, they start using a different chip? Is it the same device or a different device? Once you start looking at this closely, think about the gene ontology. That's a nightmare. It's a freaking nightmare. I used to work with these people. I used to say, please, don't tell me that this is like the truth about how genomics is organized. It's linguistic artifact. The same way as an encyclopedia. It's something that's curated by lexicographers. Fine, I love lexicographers. But don't pretend that you have access to it's Plato's cave again, right? You're looking, thinking that you're looking at these shadows. That's all you have access to. So anyway, that's my tirade against ontology as absolute truth. Sorry.
So, if I interpret your talk as NLP is now a commodity that a company like Google cares about and investing lots and lots of money in, then what is it that these people should be working on?
Oh gosh. Many things. First of all, it's not a commodity, right? It's very, very hard to make progress. All the things most of the things you try fail. And even the extraction stuff we do, I love it. We have some value from it, but it is much less value than we should. When I get back from this trip, I'm going to a meeting where we're going to discuss why is it that we cannot get more value from automated extraction. Why are our yields so low at the level of accuracy we want? So the problems are not solved. We can just start to make progress. It is the difference. The difference is not, the problems are solved. The difference is we're making enough progress and making enough things possible that enlightened funders are willing to give us some support. right? So that's all it. And then what do you work on? I mean, there's so many things. I mean, all the range from, language in its varied forms, whether it's being spoken language or social media text, which is totally different from this text. You think it's hard, it's hard enough to parse Wikipedia. Well, you think about tweets, Miles sitting next to you. Knows all about that. We're just at the very beginning. It's just at the beginning where we can start making progress. And the reason we can make progress is that we are willing to lower our sights. If some team that is looking at the output from our pipeline says, oh, well, there's all these parse trees and all this correct stuff, I don't care about that. I just care about the parts of speech tags. Great. You can make something out of it. You can improve your product that way. I'm happy. I don't have pride of ownership. We provide a number of different levels of annotation. If people can use it in useful ways, and if they work with us to do cool things, I'm excited. So it's not a commodity in that sense. It's not like Oracle provides a commodity.
So your final example here reminded me a little bit of your, I think it was around 2000, Formal Languages and Information Theory paper.
Yeah.
Together again, where you show, Chomsky says you can't distinguish this sentence, and then you show, well, if you have the right statistics, actually you can.
Yeah.
And so here is an example from Levesque. We can't answer this question, and now you have an answer. Well, actually, we can with the right kind of smart comment. So
that's not very smart, huh?
Well,
Marx's insight about counting was good.
Okay.
The rest was good.
So dumb counting, but good insight about what.
Yeah. The data. Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious, what should Levesque's questions have been then? Or another way to ask that is, what do you think the limits are of these big corpus-based counting approaches?
So here's what so this goes back to the discussion before about with the gentleman with the green shirt next to you, which is so when people talk about the difference between text and structured knowledge in knowledge bases, they're making the distinction that is not fundamental. They're making an accidental distinction. What I'm trying to say is the fact of the matter is the knowledge you need about what happens in the world is in that text for the most part. Not everything, right? There's perceptual stuff that is not rarely ever explicitly stated. But a lot of these, why is it the case that I can count so effectively and get that result? Is because the way people use language is coherent with the world. With now, does that mean that count will tell us everything about those particular verbs? Of course not. What I'm saying is that maybe that count tells us something interesting, and the other counts will tell us other interesting things. Because what those counts are doing is just summarizing sort of the sense of the text in the world, what people have said over decades or centuries about how the world is put together. And what people do with the knowledge base is just to kind of try to formalize a few of those things more directly. The same way as people do with a dictionary, where you have many sense entries for a word, is try to formalize and describe the set of the core distinctions about that word. I see no difference between they both useful exercises, but the raw data is there in the text. It's just that it has to be abstracted either by a machine or by a person. Yep.
So you haven't said much about confidence in the knowledge that you extract. For example, you talked about this rather weak cue that says that two people who are in a conjunction tend to have the same profession.
Yeah.
And that's going to conflict with other things you extract from other places. Maybe you have some constraint that people only have one profession, but that's got to be a self-constraint also.
No, it's clearly not the case, right? So yes, so that's actually a big issue with this all the extractor stuff. And one of the efforts that has been going on in another team that works with us is to try to estimate that confidence by looking at multiple sources of the same triple, the same fact, the same alleged fact and try to adjudicate their, estimate from their agreements and disagreements what the sort of what you should. It's basic. It's actually very related to there's some people who work in biostatistics know this thing called latent class analysis, and it's basically a form of latent class analysis, which is something I've actually used separately when I was doing gene prediction with many sources of evidence about where the genes are on a chromosome. You can kind of even if you don't know the ground truth, you can use agreement and disagreement patterns to learn confidence on the in your predictions. And so they've done those guys have been doing this and actually have some really nice results.
So I have a follow-up question, actually.
Yeah.
I heard at MLP from somebody that Kevin Murphy and some other people at Google are turning Predace into a graphical model.
That's actually
that's
the problem.
That's the problem.
That's the project. It's
So,
called knowledge vault.
Sorry?
Knowledge vault. Yeah, there's actually, they gave a talk about, Evgeny Gavrilovich, they gave a talk about that at AKBC, this workshop, Automatic Knowledge-Based Construction. I think they're doing really nice work. There's still a lot to do. They're making good progress.
So I understand that way compared to the relation path ranking. Sorry, I've forgotten the...
PRA.
PRA, yeah, right. Path relation...
Path ranking algorithm.
Path ranking algorithm, yeah. So I understand in graphical models how to do this kind of inference and put the evidence together, and I understand how if you observe something strongly, then conditional independence kicks in, and that's good, and so on. Do you think that the PRA is going to get worse results, but it'll be faster, or is there some reason to prefer it?
So PRA is a particular way of essentially learning rules. It's a rule learning algorithm. Those don't fit so well in graphical model setup.
Well, you can think of it as structural learning and then feed it into the graphical model.
You can. That's what it really is, right?
Okay.
And so in fact, they use PRA as one of the inputs in some of the work that. Good. Miles.
So all of this machine is in the context of search.
Not
Beacon, but matching synthesis too.
A good part of our business.
They have mentioned search or things like relevance, feedback, and so on and so forth. So I could easily imagine by trying to interrogate sort of query logs and stuff, I could do some kind of disambiguation.
You might imagine that? The interaction between IR and language analysis is one of the most challenging and interesting aspects of what we do. It's also one of the most proprietary things. So I can say is there are very interesting problems to work on there.
I think we need to call the proceedings to a close, so let's thank Fernando again.